Please welcome to the stage WSWA Executive Vice President for Strategic Communications and Marketing and Director of SipSource, Michael Bolello.
Good data helps us all make better decisions, but to operate in this industry, in this market without it, is reckless. It's also not necessary. SipSource is the only source for authentic, trusted, and validated wholesaler depletion data. And to tell us more about the latest data and trends are my friends, colleagues, and SipSource analysts, Danny Brager and Dale Stratton.
Good morning, everyone. Michael, thank you very much. Thank you to WSWA. I love these pictures of our former selves. Do you see anything wrong with this one?
Hi, Danny.
I think we're over here.
Oh, we are interchangeable.
Okay.
We are completely interchangeable. Good to see everybody. Thank you.
So we're going to talk this morning about some wines and spirit trends. And I'm going to ask Dale to give us a little description of SipSource.
I'm sure there are some folks who, most of you are familiar with SipSource, some of you are not. As Michael said, SipSource is the absolute most complete view of the three-tier business for wine and spirits. What's in SipSource, and when we think about SipSource, the things that you need to know, no projection model here. It is just purely depletion data. It covers all channels out there. So we're able to look at the on-premise and off-premise. We're covering about 330,000 different retail accounts is from where we're gathering information. And you can see there are 70,000 wine items and over 46,000 spirits items. When I say where does the data come from, it's these wholesalers. So when we look at the top line here above that, these wholesalers are going to contribute, and those wholesalers are contributing their data. The below the line, those are folks who are going to start contributing their data. We'll have that data later in 2024. We're always looking for more information. Obviously, the more depletion data we're able to get into this system, the better the data is going to be. So if you'd like to get your data into this and contribute, you're rewarded by getting access to the information. So that data then is shipped to VIP. Vermont Information Processing, most of you are familiar with them. They collect the data, they clean it up, they attribute it so that we're able to look at all of these things consistently. It gets aggregated up into a number of classes, and then we report it out. Danny, show us the things that we can report out on.
So here's a little snapshot of what's reported out. Data is reported out for various product classes and segments within wines and spirits, price tiers. On the wine side especially, we get pretty deep into where the wine is from, package type and sizes, and then we can break out channels into on versus off, all the trade channels within, and various cuts of channels. And then geographically, we look at a variety of regions across the country in a number of states, which continues to grow as more distributors provide their data. So let's start off with looking at some numbers, starting off with kind of the big picture, the 30,000-foot view. Dale, take us through.
So in order to figure out where we are, let's take a step back and look at where we started and how we got to where we are. Go back to March of 2020, COVID hits, and that changed everything that we were all doing. And really there was a significant consumer uncertainty in what they were going to do. As we went through there, I would say 2020 was fits and starts. We started, we stopped, we opened, we closed, but in the end we ended up having a soft holiday. Holiday sales were disappointing. Then we go into 2021, and in February of 2021, we really started to see trends diverge. Spirits really started to take off. They were growing dramatically. Wine started to decline after we had seen both categories come together. As those trends started to diverge, we saw the on-premise really start to restock. And that was led by spirits, and spirits always have led that. But then we started to see the emergence of kind of impacted, what we called impacted consumers and insulated consumers. And that insulated consumer ended up having a lot of disposable income, and they started to spend. So we started to see luxury spending go up. New term to me, revenge travel. That summer, we had everybody really trying to catch up for the trips they had missed the previous year, so travel went crazy. However, as we kept going in, again in 2021, we had a soft holiday. And again, sales were disappointing during the holiday season. We then had, and I point out the Russian-Ukraine conflict, that really started the uncertainty again for the consumer. The consumer was really uncertain, and 2022 really, the consumer already had some uncertainty, and then we saw inflation kick in. The news really turned to inflation, and that luxury spending really started to pull back. We started to see declines in the luxury category. Again, we had a soft holiday. And then we started again on 2023, really the same thing. Inflation kind of hung on, there was consumer uncertainty, and we had another soft holiday. So we've really had 3 very, very soft holiday seasons in a row. But we're starting to see some consumer sentiment start to improve, and we think that that's probably going to happen. However, where we are now, when you look at this, is that beer, wine, and spirits have all diverged into negative territory, where they're not growing. It's been a long time since we've seen that with all 3 categories. You can see where we were on the left in December of 2020. The trends for spirits, beer, and wine were all positive. So we have a pretty challenging road ahead of us. For us, it's also very good to think about other data sources. How is our data source comparing to others? Danny, what does that story tell?
Yeah, so we always like to triangulate on data sources and kind of see where they all sort themselves out. So this is a picture of beer, wines, and spirits going from shipments on the left-hand side to depletions, which is SipSource data for wines and spirits. Then with our friends at Nielsen, some scan data for retail sales, both off-premise and on-premise. And then just for wine, the DTC shipment trend. And you can see that everything is below, almost everything is below that dotted line for the last 12 months, 2023 versus a year ago, except for if we include RTDs in with the spirits category, then we start to see a little bit of growth. But generally, it's been a relatively soft year for alcohol overall. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're going. And, I think I always used to say that people are drinking better, but not more overall. I think at least over the last year, we could probably add in that's a little bit of potentially drinking less overall. And there's a number, which means that if we think about beverage alcohol as a whole, if people aren't drinking more, it's a zero-sum game, and we're really in a battle for market share. And there's a number of headwinds impeding our growth. There's significant consumer change that we'll talk to, generational change, lifestyle factors. There's significant competitive threats coming from outside our industry. And then the economy is still having an impact on how people behave. Think about inflation, which is obviously cooled, but still it's affecting consumer spending. Interest rates are high, which impacts businesses and consumers. And people may have been spending last year, including the holidays. A lot of that went on credit cards, and consumer debt is at an all-time high, which has to be paid at some point. So this is the sort of the economic picture, which I'm sure you see every month. The new numbers come out for inflation. The black is December of 2022 last year. The red is December 2023 this year. So you can see across overall consumer, the CPI, then food, and then various alcohol categories. You can see how significantly it's come down. I would also say that for wines and spirits, these are average price increases. They may not have been enough in terms of retail prices to offset some cost pressures, which likely impacts margins, profitability, et cetera. See on the left-hand side, interest rates obviously are significantly high. We'll see what happens in 2024 if they start to ease up. And then the other thing just to point out as one of the headwinds is that the away from home price increases have been significantly higher than they have been for what people buy in store, and that's certainly a headwind as people go out to eat and drink. So if we think about just all of those pressures on consumers, there's substitution, likely of cannabis occasions for alcohol occasions. We've got GLP-1 drugs out there that may have a dampening effect on people's appetite and consumption interest in alcohol. And then there are, as I'm sure many of you have seen and heard, there's just louder and louder anti-alcohol messages coming from various corners, both domestically and internationally. Some are suggesting that there's no safe level of alcohol consumption. The danger starts with class 1. The American Dietary Guidelines are due for review and implementation in 2025. As an industry across all beverage alcohol, we really need to band together and make sure that findings are based on sound science and that we protect ourselves. It's also, on top of that, the impact of generational change, especially coming from younger legal drinking age consumers. And that's tied to their attitudes, their behaviors, and their preferences. The population of legal drinking age consumers is becoming increasingly diverse. 1 of every 2 Gen Zers turning 21 is likely to be multicultural, Hispanic, Black, Asian, and other ethnicities. The median age for Hispanics is around 30, for Blacks around 35, for Asians around 37, whereas for the white population, it's more like 45. So we really need to understand these audiences. We need to understand their cultural backgrounds, their preferences, et cetera. And it does play out on the numbers. This shows the percentage of volume contributed by various multicultural groups compared to their importance to the legal drinking age population as a whole. A fair share contribution would be represented by an index of 100. So anything below that group is significantly under-contributing relative to their share of population. Anything over, they're obviously over-contributing or skewed higher. So if we look at this, spirits has done relatively well, except for Asians. If we look at, on the wine side, for Hispanics, Blacks, and Asians, their segments are extremely underrepresented in wine, which is certainly a long-term challenge for the wine business. That also obviously plays out in terms of ages, because especially younger legal drinking age folks are predominantly multicultural, or much more so. So you can see the Gen Z contribution to wine is significantly lower than it is for the spirits category. So again, these demographics really have a profound impact on consumer preferences and long-term trends. The other thing that plays into it, and again, this is led by a younger legal drinking age generation, is the lifestyle of moderation continues to gain momentum. There was a recent Gallup survey that painted a pretty significant increase in the percentage of younger people that are very concerned about drinking. We certainly always advocate responsible consumption and moderation, but the anti-alcohol attacks are fanning that flame. We should really pay attention to the consumer appetite for consumption within whatever they believe is a healthier lifestyle. And you see signs of that in stores. More retailers are paying attention to that sort of thing. We can debate whether it's good or bad to have a separate section, but it says to me that it's that the entire distribution channel is aware of this. And then the other thing to point out, and our friends at Nielsen IQ provided this figure, that if people are drinking non-alcoholic adult beverages, it's not that they're only drinking that. They're more than 90% are drinking alcohol on some occasions and non-alcoholic adult beverages on other occasions. So we went through a lot of sort of the headwinds. Dale, amidst all of those changes, what's the picture at wholesale look like?
That was a long run, Danny. That was a lot of slides.
Okay, we're on time.
Yeah, we're on time. So when we look at what's happening, and another thing that has really changed here is inventory levels at the wholesale level. This data is reported by the United States Census. Wholesalers send the Census Bureau their information on what their inventories are. This is for the full beer, wine, and spirits. And what we saw here, and you go back to 2021, we've seen this really big. The top line represents dollar inventory, and the bottom line represents dollar sales. So we've really seen this spike come up on wholesaler inventory. And a lot of that is a little bit, of an overreaction, the pendulum swinging from all of the constrained supply chain that we experienced. Then it's also coming into two other things that I think are happening. Number one is the consumer has pulled back. We've seen that in our data, but also the retailer is coming back, pulling back on inventory. As we have seen inflation hit and we've seen interest rates go up, that retailer is really watching their inventory dollars much, much closer, and that's driven some of of that. That also leads to when we think about route to market and getting products in. This is, again, NIQ data, and you can see the numbers there since 2019, the increase in items, the number of new SKUs that have gone into their database, and that's going to become more challenging. As we start looking forward, the retailer's really going to become much more choiceful in these times as growth trends come down and as interest rates stay high. They're going to have less, they're more than likely going to be bringing in less new items and managing that space much closer. In addition to that, we also have to look at number of outlets. And the bottom bars represent on-premise outlets. The top one represents off-premise outlets. And this comes from VIP in their account database. They identify an active account as an account who has bought something from a wholesaler, be it beer, wine, or spirits, across all of them in the last 60 days. That's an active account. We saw, and we knew this, we saw in 2019, we started to see some contraction in accounts. Then in the pandemic, we know we saw that really crunch down as we saw a lot of closures, temporary, some permanent, as that went on. We have been climbing back up, and we have been seeing more accounts come in. But really what's going on there is that we've kind of at the tail end of last year, we saw that really moderate and actually after growing, coming back. So we're thinking that that's probably the number of accounts that we're going to be working with in the near future. So more items through less accounts can be a very, very challenging thing, and they're managing that assortment. As we look forward, we're really asking these questions, and our belief is that 2024 is really going to be a pivotal year, that this is really going to identify where our categories are, where our industries are. And the questions that we're answering and the things that we're going to be looking at, number one is, how will moderation trends really impact consumption and the trends in our business? How will the changing demographics impact various categories? I think Danny's slide there really talks about how that's going to go and what that's going to look like and who we need to appeal to across those different categories. And we really, is it a zero-sum game? Is it really just now going to be about stealing share? And that's wine versus beer versus spirits. That's retailers, that's brands, that's everybody. Where are you going to steal share if you're going to get growth? And then on premiumization, will it continue? If yes, to what extent? We came through some significant premiumization, and that premiumization is unlikely to come back. We still believe the category will have premiumization, but it's just not going to be nearly as strong as it was. And then really it's all going to come down to how does the economy perform? What does that look like? And that's going to be a driver for us, and those are the things that we're going to be watching. As we think about the categories and where we are, first with spirits. And on these charts, the bars represent share, the dots represent current trends in the marketplace. And so really the only two segments that are showing sustained growth right now, cocktails, pre-mixed cocktails, doing very, very well. Obviously, that's largely driven by canned product, which has absolutely exploded. Tequila continues to grow. And I think that that's something that's really significant because when we think about that pre-mixed cocktail category, the number two ingredient, the number two base alcohol in pre-mixed cocktails behind vodka is tequila. So that tequila is still remaining very, very strong. Brandy cognac, mostly cognac, has really had a tough couple of years. We're seeing that come back a little bit. Long way to go. The price tiers, when we think about this from a price tier, as I said, we had that luxury spending, and you can see what that looks like back in 2021, what the trends were for spirits over $50. It was unbelievable the amount of spending that was happening there. That has contracted. We believe that that's going to balance back out. It will come back closer to zero, if not into positive. But the real growth area is going to be in that middle area where we see the 17 to 25, those areas. Those seem to have done better and maintained. The low price category has been has really maintained, and we've seen a lot of that moving into the on-premise as well. On premiumization, all we look at here on premiumization is What's the growth rate of under 25 versus over $25 retail spirits? And that's what we quote as a retail price. And as you look at this, you can see that that over 50 is slightly better to end the year. It was much bigger. You can see that brandy cognac has a pretty big impact on that one, as does the vodka category. With that, Danny, what are the wine trends?
So let's look at some wine numbers. Again, just to set this up, the blue bar represents the share of the category on a volume basis. The red dot in this case represents the percent change this year versus a year ago. And I just drew that dotted line at 0. Obviously, we'd like to see some varietals start to show up above the 0 line, but as you can see, that's been really difficult. Now, this goes across all different price tiers, so it breaks down. We can always find areas of growth as we drill down more granularly into the SipSource data. I organized this one from the biggest share, varietal-wise, Chardonnay to the right-hand side, so left to right. But if I kind of resort it out and look at how do the growth rates sort out from the best growth rate to the not as good growth rate, and do it that way, and then I just colored the whites with yellow and the reds with red, obviously, and rosé and pink, you can see there's a preponderance of varietals that are performing better that are white varietals. And I think that can relate to lighter styles, lower ABV percentages. Maybe those varieties do better with Mediterranean diets and that sort of foods and so on. So I think there's some reasons for that, but it's certainly something to watch. And then Dale showed a slide on price tiers for spirits. This is the, sorry, we'll come to that in a second. Let me just go on to one other one. If we go beyond table wine and look at sparkling wine and other wine types, the one variety style within all of the wine category in terms of growth continues to be Prosecco. Every time we look at it, it's either has been double digits, now it's single digits, but it's still on top of double digits, so that continues to be a strong one. And then port, the one that's up there, that's largely domestic port and a TikTok campaign that drove a ton of business for one particular brand, and that's now moderating.
And a year ago, so we're seeing that now moderate, right? A year ago, that was like 80% growth rate. So that fad's probably run its course for the most part.
Yeah, I'd agree. So here's the price tier chart for wine, and these are 3 consecutive years of growth. We're showing 2021, 2022, 2023. The left-hand side is still the bulk of the volume of the wine category, almost 70% of the volume. It continues to decline, and that's really what's dragging down the overall growth rates for wine. When we get to that, to the right-hand side, you can see the same thing that we saw in spirits, that huge growth rate that's now come way back, and we hope and believe that will moderate and come back a little bit more north. But the area of the best growth right now is in that kind of medium tier, similar to spirits. In the case of wine, sort of 11 to 15, 15 to 25 is where the most significant growth is. So we're going to move on, talk a little bit about channels, because we've just been talking about big picture, on and off premise together, but channels don't always move together, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So from a channel standpoint, what we've seen, and as I said earlier when we were talking about the restocking, you can go to the next slide, Danny, that the spirits really have outpaced wine in coming back and the reopening. And we see here that really the spirits category, top line is on-premise, bottom line is off-premise, and then the middle line, blue line, is the combined total there. So when we look at that, you can see that the spirits in the on-premise has remained really resilient. It's continuing to grow. It's up 2.8% for total spirits, where everything else has moved into the negative. Where we're really seeing that pinch continues to be retail. The off-premise, we're just not getting growth. And a lot of that, again, I think comes back to that inventory management that we talked about earlier. When we look at this across other categories and what has happened, and we always like to think about this in terms of pre-pandemic, where were we? And we started doing a channel shift index back then, and all we were doing is we were looking at what share of total depletions did the on-premise constitute of the total depletion volume. And what we see here is that for the first month, Actually, spirits have the same share in the on-premise that they did back before the pandemic. So realistically, from a share standpoint, spirits in the on-premise are back where they were and performing, where wine and beer continue to still struggle within that and haven't gotten back to their pre-pandemic levels. With that, Danny, why don't we cut down a little bit deeper on subchannels?
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to add on to that, this slide, Dale, is that, and I've got pictures on the very bottom on the right-hand side, the number of fine dining outlets are about a third less than they were pre-COVID. And if you think about wine and kind of the heartland for wine tends to be in more of the fine dining locations, and that's certainly a headwind. There's just less places where wine is sold in those fine dining outlets. So like Dale said, we're going to sort of drill down and look at some of the sub-channels within each of on-premise and off-premise. I'm going to cover on-premise here. The left-hand side is spirits, the right-hand side is wine. These are growth rates, and I just ordered them again from what sub-channel is doing the best to what sub-channel isn't doing as well as you go left to right. What stuck out in the case of both spirits and wine, the two channels that are doing the best, or the three actually, transportation, so all that people going back and traveling, going to airport clubs, et cetera, before they get on their flights. The other on-premise, that includes things like concessions and other sorts of things. So again, it's people going out to enjoy themselves. And then recreation are things like private clubs, country clubs, things like that. Those three channels tend to be doing the best, followed by the traditional channels, which would include things like dining, bars, nightclubs, hotels, et cetera. And again, that order was consistent for both spirits and wine. Each of those sub-channels, they also had different sort of profiles. Some things work better in certain channels, some things don't work as well. So this is just one example where we wanted to look at what's the importance of spirits excluding prepared cocktails, so the sort of core spirits, which is the dark blue line, and then what does that look like for ready-to-drink cocktails if we're talking about sort of the cans, the High Noons, Cutwaters, et cetera, of the world. And those ready-to-drink cocktails, the cans, et cetera, they do significantly better in bars, in recreation outlets, in that other, like concessions and so on, than they do in things like restaurants and other more, again, traditional sorts of channels. Dale, how about, what does it look like for off-premise?
Yeah, so when we start looking at the retail side of things, and same setup, spirits on the left, wine on the right, we see the convenience channel performing best. And we really have seen the convenience channel continuing to do very, very well. On the other end of that spectrum, you have the drug channel, and the drug channel has continued to struggle and is struggling mightily. And I think part of that is that the drug channel had carved out and gone after a strategy of being a convenience store, mostly in urban areas, and trying to steal that convenience store trip. They've been closing stores, pulling back outlets, so we've seen that pull back, and some of that is flowing back into the convenience store. We also see mass merchandise outlets doing well. And generally speaking, I think that has to do with inflation. As we think about what's happening with inflation, money saving, also with gas prices, people tend to, when gas prices go up, look for that single trip, try and drive less and go to that bigger outlet to satisfy many, many more of their needs. So we believe that trend will probably continue. Then when we look at this and you think about what is happening within that convenience channel, we really see it is about smaller sizes. So for wine, this is things under 750 milliliter. And you can see really that is what's driving the growth in the convenience channel for wine. And also then, but when you look at that for spirits, and we know that that's canned cocktails, right? Canned cocktails are doing an extraordinarily strong performance within that, and that small size is driving what's happening within the convenience channel in a very, very big way. With that, as we think about this, as I said, that's really driven by RTDs, and we'll have our resident RTD expert, Danny Brager, industry RTD expert, Danny Brager, take over to talk about ready-to-drink category.
My favorite subject, because if I ask 10 people to define RTDs, I might get 10 different definitions. And there's other things, there's other words that people sometimes ascribe to this kind of sector. Some might call it the alternative beverages, or kind of non-core items, or the fourth category. But if you add it up together, and if I throw into that not just RTD spirits, but also things like hard seltzers, wine cocktails and spritzers, flavored malt beverages, et cetera, it's $11 billion of consumer spending just in off-premise outlets. That was $4 to $5 billion 5 years ago. We said that people aren't spending more in total. That means that $5 billion extra into this is coming from $5 billion of other sorts of things. And it's attributes like flavor, convenience in terms of the package type and size, and for most, generally lower ABVs, not always, but generally, those are some of the characteristics that are driving consumers to these categories, and clearly consumers really like them. If I take apart that 11 billion, about 8 billion of that is hard seltzers like the White Claws and Trulies, and the flavored malt beverages like Twisted Tea, for example, that's 8 billion. Wine cocktails and spritzers is around $1 billion. And then spirits is about 1.7 billion, again, just in off-premise, not in as many outlets because of laws across the country, but certainly growing the fastest. And while I'm looking at a picture here that I took in a store that kind of looks somewhat organized, I think when consumers are in front of that section, they don't see it quite as organized as we might. There's a lot of things, sometimes it's merchandised well, sometimes not as well. But it's clearly a significant growth factor, and I don't think that's going to change. I think that's here to stay. Within that, I think there's a number of questions. There's certainly a tremendous amount of shifting across that broader RTD space. Malt-based hard seltzers, the White Claws, Trulies of the world, they're going down in terms of overall size. Flavored malt beverages like the Twist, driven by Twisted Tea and others, are going up, so they kind of offset each other. Spirit-based RTDs, double-digit gains. You see it every report that we look at. Strong gains, although the growth rates are decelerating somewhat as the base grows. There's a lot of churn in that category. I love to look with my friends at Nielsen and the scan data at just the ranks of the top brands. And there are 2 or 3 that stay at the top pretty consistently. But then if you go a little bit further, there's a lot of things coming in that are doing well, and a lot of things that may be declining and moving out of the top ranks. So I always have questions about, is the brand destined, is it a short-term gain, or is it there for sustained growth? What's the unique product value proposition that this RTD is different from this RTD or that RTD? What's going to make it different? What are not just the trial rates, but what are the repeat rates for that brand? And if that brand is doing well in a certain region of the country, what is the plan to scale that? There's also the question of, do I take a mainstream brand and just extend into RTD, or launch a new brand? And I can tell you by looking at the data, brand extensions have not worked anywhere near as well as new brand launches. And then, what's the future? It's certainly going to be a continued hotbed of innovation. We see lots of interesting things all the time, flavors, et cetera, alcohol types, et cetera. There's certainly opportunities beyond traditional channels. The RTD, just the occasion type, lends itself to lots of different places where these products can be consumed. I think we're going to see attempts to premiumize that segment, to move up price points over time, and I see that already. And then I still have questions about, is the RTD category, is it really just cannibalizing mainstream products? What's happening in a restaurant or bar when somebody's ordering an RTD instead of a cocktail that the mixologist or someone in the waitstaff that might be making for a consumer? So, interesting segment. We'll continue to watch it, obviously, and we'll see where it goes. So, I think we're sort of where do we go now? I would just put this up. I'm not going to go through them all, but no matter kind of, as we look at the numbers, we always should have the consumer in the forefront of our thinking, because they're changing quickly, and that's impactful on category trends. And they're hugely interested in flavors. There's also the recognition of cultural nuances. Different multicultural groups may have different types of flavors that appeal to them more or less. They're seeking convenience. They're driven by experiences. Certainly that we talked about the interest in wellness, which is both the things that I put in my body, whether it be to eat or to drink, as well as what's good for the planet. They're seeking information, so we're obviously going to see changes in terms of what's required to be on labels, and consumers are driving that interest. They're interested in your purpose as a company and your values. And at least for some categories, it doesn't have to always be complex. So something that's simple, that is easily understandable, drives consumer choice. So for the next few months, if we look at just the SipSource numbers, what's in front of us, Dale?
Yeah, so as we look at what's happening, and these are comps, and the first 3 bars represent January, February of 2023. If you're having a challenging January of this year, it's not a surprise because actually last January was pretty strong. The depletions were actually much stronger in January versus the year previous. So tough January would be expected. Then we start to see the trends really start to be much more favorable for both wine and spirits as we get into February, March, and into Q3.